My Valentine is beautiful. Auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, little buds poked through the front of her sleeveless t-shirt, short silk boxers, and pink ankle socks. It's erotic in a cozy way that belies an intimacy that is far beyond superficial erotica. I wiggle my ass to sit more comfortably, and tiny waves of pleasure remind me that I won't be needing a little blue pill tonight. She's sitting at the desk in her bedroom, long, slender legs spread out before her. Fuck, she's gorgeous. The sliding glass door faces the tiny patio outside her bedroom. A short wall supports the steep, ivy-covered hillside beyond 3 feet past the apartment's edge. I am sitting in the ivy again tonight, covered in darkness as the light from her bedroom puts her on stark display. I'm directly across from her, but she can't see me. She never sees me. She picks up her phone and looks at the number. Her face wrinkles in disgust, and she silences the call. I gulp my thermos and reach for the Vaseline. The jar is almost empty. I have to buy a new one each week. There's a rustling from behind and above me, and I instantly freeze. I'm very well hidden when it's dark, but anyone with a flashlight would find my nest immediately. Slowly, I turn around. There's a shadowed figure walking in the darkness. My pulse races, and I can feel Vomit's finger tickling the back of my throat. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He's walking down the hill, and he's getting closer to me. Then he stops. He pulls something out of his pocket. It glows, and I can see the outline of his scowl. Her phone rings. She gives it half a glance before immediately hanging up. The man's phone light turns off. His call has been terminated. Then I understand. It's that fucking guy Ned who must be the pushiest asshole in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's been asking her out for 6 months now, and my Valentine is simply disgusted by his advances. I know all about her life because I thoroughly catalog what I find in her trash can each day. I look at him with such fury that I nearly shatter the Vaseline jar in my white-knuckle grip. Ned is such a creep. Then I notice something, his hand, shifting in the dark. A faint glimmer of light bounces off metal. My breath catches. A knife, a long, wicked hunting knife, and it's pointed toward my Valentine. He's holding an enormous hunting knife. I want to cry. I cannot imagine anything bad happening to my sweet Valentine. She deserves the very best. After months of me licking her silverware while she's at work to make sure it isn't poisoned, fucking Ned is going to kidnap her. He takes a step forward, and I act. Of course, I have my Nikon D7500 DSLR camera at the ready, but the flash attachment is rarely used for obvious reasons. This time, however, I turn it on. Then I point and shoot. Ned is negotiating the tricky hillside right as the flash blinds him, and the effect is perfect. I catch an instant of pure shock on his face. He tumbles and comes to a rest at the bottom of the hill, right where the short retaining wall meets her patio. All is still. I crane my neck slowly, surely, to see why he isn't moving, and from my angle, it's obvious. The hunting knife has come to rest deep in his left temple. One eye has popped, and the socket is filled with nothing but white jelly. He's dead. She glances outside with a look of concern and a furrowed brow. She might have noticed the flash from the corner of her eye, but she hadn't been facing me at that exact second. And her door is fucking soundproof. Moreover, from where she sits, it's impossible to see the pitch-black hillside. It's okay. When the morning light comes, it will illuminate my gift to her. She'll wake up, step outside, and see my gift. Ned, neatly laid out beneath her window, his lifeless eyes staring up in silent devotion. Then, finally, she'll know. She is protected, she is loved, and she is never alone, always watching. Happy Valentine's Day, my sweet. BD. It read, "Will you be mine?" There was no name, no one to whom it had originally addressed, just a crumpled red envelope and a blank white card with the aforementioned question written inside on the right. The black ink had smeared either at the time of writing or sometime during its travels through the curious woman's pocket. It somehow made the question seem sad and desperate. She gave me one last glance, then stepped away, mingling with the crowd that seemed to appear from out of nowhere at that very moment. I didn't know what to do, and had anyone else given it to me, I probably would have tossed it. But the woman had been strangely, unconventionally attractive, so I kept it. I used it to buoy my spirits after what had been a particularly frustrating day at work. She could have given it to anyone, but she'd chosen me. Back home, I set the card on the counter. The red ink seemed darker now, like wet blood, as if it had just been written. A few minutes into dinner preparations, I got this feeling in the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. Turning around, I scanned my small apartment, able to see the entirety of the kitchen and the living room beyond where I was standing at the stove. There wasn't anyone in sight, and yet I still felt as if I were being observed. It was around 8 p.m., and night had already set in, but my living room curtains were still open. I crossed the room, closed them, and returned to the kitchen. The ominous feeling lingered, but I ignored it and finished cooking. Halfway through dinner, I heard a knock at the door, an unusual and alarming occurrence since I never had visitors. I froze, hoping it was a mistake, but another knock followed. Gripping my fork tightly, I crept to the door and peered through the peephole, relieved yet unsettled to see no one there. I hadn't heard any footsteps leaving. Carefully, I cracked the door open, then fully, confirming the hallway was empty. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed writing on my door. "Will you be my mine?" The last letter was smeared just like the ink on the card. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the door shut. My heart pounded as I stumbled back to the kitchen, my appetite gone. A sudden compulsion drove me to check the card again. My hands trembled as I pulled it from its envelope, placing it on the table. Its blank face filled me with an inexplicable dread, as if it held some terrible, unknowable secret. Finally, I willed my hands to open the card. Inside, written on every single inch of space, was the phrase, "Will you be mine?" Over and over, in every direction, some instances more erratic than others. There was a terrible and terrifying variety to the scribblings. I'd never felt more disturbed by such a relatively simple thing. "Will you be mine? Will you be mine? Will you be mine?" I threw the card away, but after a few moments spent on the couch trying to calm myself, I got up, fetched my candle lighter, and burned the card in the kitchen sink. As the flames consumed it, crumpling and blackening the material, I felt a new sensation, not exactly nausea, but a bodily lightness. I gripped the counter, attempting to steady myself. It wasn't until I had practically keeled over that I noticed the fumes weren't gray or black or the color of any smoke I'd seen before, but red as the envelope the card had been in. The doors unlocked. My mind slips, like the way your brain slows down and unknowingly disappears into the void while you're on the bus, hours passing in what feels like seconds. I wake up at the kitchen table. I'm unbound, but I'm in intense pain. I searched my body almost instinctually, clawing at myself to find where the pain was coming from. Mine. The words were carved into my chest and down to my groin. Is this for real? No one owns me, but this here is claiming otherwise. My mind is slipping again, this time like juice flowing out of a spilled bottle, small waves of consciousness pooling out before settling into unconsciousness. I wake up an hour later and call the police. I'm taken to the hospital. The police had discovered the card, the same one that I burned. What did the card say inside? The officer met my eyes for a moment, a look of slight bewilderment on his face. I'm glad you're mine. The officer read the words slowly, his face pale. I felt a chill run through me because I knew those weren't the words written when I first opened it, and yet, deep inside, something in me was glad too. Once I'm well enough to leave the hospital, I'm finding a new place to live. The landlord can have everything in my apartment. I'm never going back there. For the first time in my life, I'm happy I'll be spending Valentine's Day alone. They sat at a table not far from mine. The diner was practically empty, not exactly a prime location for romantic dates with its grease-slick floors and the ever-present aroma of burnt bacon. And yet, they'd seated themselves at the table immediately to my left, as if they needed an audience for their public displays of affection. I had already ordered, so I kept my face down and ate my breakfast bowl in peace. But every so often, I'd hear them loudly professing their love for one another, giggling, and making all manner of needlessly performative gestures. It bordered on perverse, so I eventually looked pointedly at them with what I hoped was a silencing glare. I was just trying to eat my lunch in peace. The woman noticed my look and, in misinterpretation or defiance of the intended effect, smiled at me. The man, seeing her attention elsewhere, turned, and he too smiled. Their flippant responses would have angered me had I not noticed the oddness of their expressions. The smiles weren't impolite, not exactly, but there was something beneath them, an underlying impression or intimation of hostility, one that was far more potent than what I'd added to my glare. The waitress refilled my coffee, giving me a brief reprieve from the obnoxious couple nearby. As I finished my meal and went to pay, I overheard the woman mention loners, clearly about me. I stopped, glaring, but she ignored me. The man laughed, at me or the situation, I wasn't sure. Before I could dwell on it, the waitress called me over to pay, and I left a generous tip, feeling I'd nearly caused a scene. Just as I reached the door, the woman called out, inviting me to join them for the day. Her beauty, which I hadn't noticed before, was almost overwhelming. I felt compelled to accept. The man, as if sensing my decision, rose without a word, and we left together. We wandered the town, visiting shops. They claimed to be from old Europe, though they shared little else about themselves. Instead, they asked about me, why I was alone on Valentine's Day. I gave a weak answer, which they accepted, though the woman occasionally pointed out women, asking if I found them attractive. The man would laugh, but not unkindly. Something was off about them. Their movements were too smooth, their smiles too wide. When they laughed, it didn't quite sound human. They gravitated toward history, mythology, and ancient cultures, especially European ones. I tried to deduce their origins, but before I could, the man said something cryptic about history, not telling the full truth about them. His friendly smile hid something darker. My heart raced, and for a split second, his face seemed wrong, inhuman. I instinctively backed away, only to hit a bookshelf. His expression returned to normal, and he asked if I was all right. I forced myself to say yes. We found the woman in the horror section, engrossed in a book on old blood drinkers. Not quite vampires, but something more primal. They chuckled together, then wandered toward an under-renovation section of the store. A warning flared in my mind not to follow, but another, deeper impulse overrode it. By the time I rounded the corner, they had changed. I was alone with them, frozen in place, trapped under their monstrous thraldom. Their voices, speaking in eerie unison, crawled through my skull like something ancient and dead. No one should be alone on this day. The woman's lipless mouth opened, revealing a long, red-veined proboscis that snaked toward me. Horror locked me in place as it brushed my neck. Panicked, I begged them not to drink my blood, thinking them some ancient precursors to vampires. They laughed, a ghastly, rasping sound that sent ice through my spine. "Could you imagine if we drank blood?" the man mused. "Oh, I'd just give it all up," the woman said, her grotesque tongue still pressed to my skin. Then came the pain, a sharp stab in my neck. The proboscis pulsed, pumping something into me. My body burned and froze at once, fevered and intoxicated, reeling from whatever foreign thing now coursed through my veins. My legs buckled, and as I collapsed, I saw their forms begin to shift back. I woke to a bookstore employee shaking me, their face full of concern, a phone in their hand. 911 was dialed, but not yet called. A small crowd had gathered. The couple was gone. Desperate to believe it had been a fevered hallucination, I assured them I was fine and fled. At home, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't bother wiping away my tears. A puncture wound marked my neck, rimmed with a strange purple ring, dark streaks trailing from it like veins infected with something unnatural. It's been 3 hours since confirming the wound, and I've started hearing her voice in my head. She calls to me across a distance that seems both vast and close, offering words of comfort and praise, sometimes sounding like a mother, other times like a lover. And a certain feeling of affection has blossomed in my heart, a longing for a companionship whose nature feels disturbingly inhuman. I don't even know her name. They never told me, and I, for whatever reason, never bothered to ask. And yet, I'm starting to think that I love her, that I need her, and that she feels the same way about me. Have always felt alone and bitter on Valentine's Day. But now, I don't think I'll ever be alone again. Even in my mind, she is here, whispering, waiting,